Hello everybody and welcome back to the test screening. My name is Chloe.
And my name is Billy.
And we have once again got a jam-packed show for you today. But before we get into all of that, I just want to talk a little bit about the writer's strike. This has been all over the news, and this is a repeat of, there was a writer's strike, a very famous writer's strike, a while ago that impacted a lot of shows, especially a lot of American shows. When about what's that?
It was November 2007. It was the 2007 to 2008 Writers Guild of America strike. And I remember I think it affected the first season of Breaking Bad being so short with 7 episodes. It cut the 4th season of Lost short at 14 episodes. Yeah, it impacted a lot of TV shows in a big way. And unfortunately, as we're seeing a repeat of those sort of industrial action again in the Writers Guild, it seems that not much has unfortunately changed with regards to giving writers' rooms, especially in America, fair pay for their work.
Yeah, it's different. It's interesting because obviously the industry has changed since the last strike, and this time a lot of the controversy has come around use of AI for writing scripts, which is actually a really scary thought, especially for me, and also the royalties over streaming services, which weren't as big of an issue back when the last writer's strike happened. It's become really prevalent, and writers aren't getting sufficient royalties for their work over time, especially with a lot of the cancellations that happen over on Netflix and other streaming sites. It's a really interesting debate because we want to see good content get made, but we want to see those people paid fairly. A lot of writers don't really make the living, but I think a lot of people think that they do. It'll be interesting to see how this writer's strike impacts the industry and whether or not we see some changes for the better.
Yeah, it's interesting the kind of the time at which this has come now as well, because it seems like now more than ever there's such a demand for new content. I mean, we were talking about this, I think, in our intro discussion on last week's episode with regards to streaming. There seems to be such an influx of new shows coming all the time at the moment, and I wonder if that attitude from the industry of we need to pump out as much content as possible to keep the revenue coming in is leading to them sort of cutting corners with regards to giving writers fair pay and just not really favouring the craft of their work and the development and rewarding them for their work in the way that they should be. And of course, that, given that there's so many really massive and influential shows going on at the moment and they've decided to cut work now, is essentially throwing everything into total chaos, which I guess is the exact point of the strike. I mean, Cobra Kai and Stranger Things and Yellow Jackets have all had to halt production. I think it's also affecting season 2 of House of the Dragons. So it's causing a tremendous amount of disruption, which hopefully will mean that the writers will be heard and they will have increased funding as well. I guess and this is a purely selfish point of view, but I think you would just hope that when the shows come out on the other side, they're not that adversely affected in terms of the quality of their screenplays. Obviously, that is not the most important thing, but it's a consideration as a fan of some of those shows. I remember I'm not sure how much the strike necessarily contributed to this, but season 2 of Friday Night Lights, which I think was around the time of the first strike, was it's quite a famous example of a show kind of dipping in quality from the jump to first to the second season, and lots of quite incoherent and very sort of outlandish and unrealistic storylines, and you kind of wonder if that had something to do with it, and you would hope that that isn't repeated with any of the shows here, especially considering Stranger Things is going into its final season and we all want it to stick the landing, consider the cultural juggernaut it's been in television over the past several years. There was one of the things that made me smile tremendously. I'm not sure if it was a real thing, but there was something I saw on Twitter. They're saying online group threatens to leak finale of Succession unless fair pay is reached within a week. And whoever retweeted was like, pay them now.
When writers get together to protest, Sparks fly, genius happens. Some of the picket lines have been some of the most creative picket line slogans I've ever seen. I think for me the biggest fears that I think a lot of writers are facing at the moment is the AI. It's a chatbot. Um, it's worryingly good. Is what I would say, because I've had a little go on it and it's not quite there yet. I can very easily see how a program like chatbot could be used to flesh out a script to get a lot of work done in a short amount of time. And the fact that these things could be used on big franchises to kind of maintain continuity, to tie everything together, to use all of the existing things to create something new, that's scary. That is a scary possibility, and it's something that I think there isn't a lot of regulation about at the moment, just because it's so new. But I think the direction we're going in is, if studios don't want to have to pay a writer and they can get a bot to do it, they will. Even if it just means getting the bot to do the main body of it and then getting a writer to tidy it up, that's still a lot less work than having a writer laboring over it for months.
Yeah, they're going to be contracted for far less time, aren't they? To go through and do the finessing of the main weight of the text that the AI will have just churned out in no time at all. I mean, I never would have thought that AI would get to a point where it can, replicate, the poetic quality of stories and the emotional qualities of cinematic storytelling as well. But it does seem like we're heading in that direction. And not only is that kind of difficult to my mind to comprehend how a computer is able to do that, but it's also kind of frightening because, like you say, it will makes writing obsolete. And I'm just like, I really don't think or didn't think there was any substitute for experience and life baggage into a screenplay. But if an AI is able to, from pre-existing information, emulate that to a very convincing degree, that is quite a worrying prospect.
We wish all of the people striking, all of the writers striking out in America, the very best of luck. I hope it gets resolved. And moving on, we're just going to have a little bit of a chat about Rye Lane, which has found a new home on Disney Plus. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, well, as if I needed any more excuse to talk about Rye Lane, which is my favourite film of the year so far. It's streaks ahead of the competition, in my opinion. It's a British black-focused romantic comedy, which is great, as we normally don't see a lot of romantic comedy dramas, particularly British ones, that have two prominent black leads. So that's really wonderful from a representation point of view, and also a film that is so reverent for areas of South London like Peckham and Brixton, and the very lane that the film is titled after. I won't pour over it in full review depth at this stage, because you can go back to a previous episode and look at that. But it's so well written and so colourful and so creative from a filmmaking perspective. It really puts, for me, visual character and extravagance and creativity back into a genre that is so typically performance and dialogue centric. And I genuinely came out with the biggest spring in my step and the biggest smile on my face after having witnessed a really warm-hearted and lovely and well-acted story, but also just a really, really perfectly constructed debut feature, which is crazy, how well-formed it is, considering it's, Rain Alan Miller's first feature. It had its world premiere at Sundance, and it has received a lot of critical acclaim so far, but it hasn't done extraordinarily well at the worldwide box office, although I do think it is. I mean, it's played for a lot longer at the Watershed than I initially expected it to, so that shows that there is demand for it. But if you haven't seen it yet, it's an absolute gem. It's on Disney Plus now. If you take off the credits, it's 77 minutes long, so there really isn't any excuse. It's absolutely fabulous, and please don't miss it.
You know what I'm going to be watching tonight?
I cannot wait to hear it.
That's definitely going on the list. Okay, so let's go into our first review, and this is over from last week when we were talking about movie soundtracks. Our friend Charlie recommended The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and I think we both have mixed feelings on this film. It's a strange one. Why don't you go first? Tell us what it's about.
Well, so The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, it stars Ben Stiller. He is a negative asset manager at Life magazine. So he essentially manages the negatives, so the raw sort of film prints of the photos that get put in Life magazine. The magazine comes to an end. The company is being wrapped up, so they're coming to issue their final issue of the magazine, and they want to go out with a bang and come through with sort of a really impactful sort of final cover image, which of course he is in charge of sourcing. And I think he's done past work with this mysterious independent photographer named Sean O'Connell, who has sent him work in the past. He's kind of been a liaison between Life magazine and the photographer, and he's kind of sent a mysterious message with some negatives and, you know, a gift for their work together. And the negative for this image that could potentially be the last cover photo, it gets misplaced. And there's a whole point about how Ben Stiller's character, Walter Mitty, he's sort of stagnant in life. He's quite restrained. He doesn't take chances. And sort of partially spurred up by the need to find this photo from the photographer and a recently hired employee by the name of Cheryl, played by Kristen Wiig, he's sort of thrown into adventure where he sort of starts to take claim of his life and sort of carpe diem, seize the moment, and go on a really like globe-trotting adventure to sort of cliched kind of find himself and sort of find the vibrancy in life again. And it does so through sort of weaving through elements of surrealism and dream sequences. He often daydreams a lot. And yeah, that's the essence of the film's plot.
The beginning, I'd say even up to the first 20 minutes, I was really enjoying. I really liked the main character. I really liked Ben Stiller's character. I related to it a lot because I'm a daydreamer, and the things that I daydream about are in the realm of that kind of weirdness. You know, where it's just like a human mind thing where, you know, someone will mention something and all of a sudden you just zone out and your brain is conjuring up something completely different. So I felt seen in a way that not a lot. I did feel very seen. I think where it started to lose me was actually where life began to get less ordinary and the plot started to get more bizarre in reality. I think the film had some major pacing issues for me. It would gain my attention for a bit and then it would lose it, and then it would gain it for a set piece and then it would lose it. It's almost as if you needed those dream sequences to kind of wake you up, you know, get you out of the boredom and snap you out of it. And yeah, I just found that there were moments where I felt myself drifting a lot. And in terms of the score, I went back and listened to the score on YouTube. It is really, really nice. It's a good score, but it wasn't very prevalent in the mix. It didn't stand out to me as much as I thought it was, considering this was a recommendation about the score. That being said, it's a lovely score. It is really nicely composed. It's just you wouldn't necessarily notice it unless you went back and listened to it separately.
Yeah, it's kind of in that mold of we're going to use sort of 30 to 40 second small kind of leitmotif cues as a way to sort of drive certain more energetic moments of the story, like when we have Walter coming to sort of a realization about the next step of his journey or the country he has to go to where Sean might be and where the photo might be. So we get this kind of very sort of small musical cue to sort of drive the narrative forward in that moment and propel us onto the next section. But then for large moments of the story, it is absent. Those cues are nice. I did find some of like the small sort of quite light and breezy guitar picking and some of the very soft kind of synth and keyboard lines. I did find them a little bland in places, but they did kind of provide the sort of the energetic rush the story needed in certain moments to move into those segues, you know, in the various stages of his journey through the countries he visits, and also, you know, moments to differentiate and show the the alteration in atmosphere when he sort of goes into a surrealist episode. And there are some longer pieces where there are some more kind of rousing, surging ring sections. I don't think the score is particularly memorable, but I do think it's a fairly effective example of using generally those shorter pieces to, as cues for those significant moments in the screenplay. Although I wouldn't necessarily say it rewards a closer repeat listen to the score album. I mean, I don't know about you, but just in terms of the quality of the wider film, I've got a major issue with the way it uses surrealism. I think it incorporates it in a way that's really tacky and doesn't gel well at all with sort of the reality of the human drama. It just, if like that moment where he really abruptly jumps off the train track and into a window and sort of this sort of faux explosive action sequence, that seemed like kind of really obnoxious and really out of place. It kind of, and also the moment where that sort of snowstorm and that more rugged sort of adventurous counterpart to Ben Stiller's character sort of comes in through like the side of the office, and it's like a kind of a snowy mountain sort of bleeds into the side of the office. I don't know, there were certain sections and dream sequences that just made, for me, brought an element of just a really rough and cobbled together imitation of like a sequence from a Terry Gilliam film, and that's not really when you're going for something that's kind of like whimsical and surreal and kind of rousing and inspirational about life. That's not really the vibe for me you want to be evoking, and especially when you're not doing it particularly well. So that did kind of wane for me throughout the film. And when there weren't moments like that, because there are stretches where it is just purely based in reality, the moment to moment story of him going to find this photo, it was quite drawn out, and I didn't feel like there was enough sort of detail in the moment to moment action for me to justify, the near 2-hour runtime. I think it runs about an hour and 50. And yeah, I did find for stretches it did lose my interest, and it felt like a shorter idea that had been stretched out for longer than the script could really handle.
I actually really liked that scene where he comes through the magazine cover in the hallway. But there were certain bits that I did feel worked. I almost wish they'd been more consistent. So he works at a magazine shop. I kind of wish that, all of the covers had done something, or every time he'd had some kind of zoning out that maybe had been the catalyst for it, that he'd seen an image that was brought to life, almost like Harry Potter, like if we had images that moved in the background every now and then. I think that could have been something really cool.
Yeah. But maybe more fluidly incorporate it into the world of the film.
I mean, like I said, I did relate to it a lot. I feel like when you zone out, that is how it is sometimes. I think the transition for me from fairly grounded film with surrealist elements to full-on action adventure film, that was what was hard for me to follow. That was why I kind of clocked out of it a bit. I found it a bit corny at times, and I mean, I can completely understand why Charlie would like this film, because some of the exteriors, the shots in the cinematography of just these mountain ranges and things, are amazing. Those are really like nicely shot. But there's this bit where he's kind of skateboarding down the.
I was just about to say that as well. That really thrilling, sort of fast-moving, sort of steady camera tracking him down that really long winding road on the skateboard. I'm just like, this is cool, and this is very much Charlie's vibe.
Yeah, definitely. But I think for me, it was overlong. What it was, the wasn't tight enough to keep me invested for the slower moments. It was a really weird Papa John's product placement.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought that was really strange. I wasn't going to bring it up, but this seems really out of place for me. But
yeah. But overall, I think it was a fairly harmless film. It was a good cult to watch. It's just not something that I think that I'll be returning to. But I can understand why people really like it. I can understand why people relate to it. and find something important in it that maybe I just didn't this time around.
Yeah, I thought it was fine. I've seen far more aggravating and indulgent films. I just didn't really feel like in the end it had a lot to say with its seizing life message that I hadn't seen done more emotively and empathetically before. But I did appreciate the attempt at kind of like trying to put the surrealist twist on it, even if it wasn't particularly well executed for me. But yeah, it's perfectly okay for what it is.
Well, on to our first review, and it's a streaming review this week. We're starting off with This Is Beef, which is on Netflix. And I've only seen the first 3 episodes, so I'm going to leave most of this to you. But I am very much enjoying it. It's A24, which I didn't even realize this was an A24 production.
Me neither.
But you know what? Looking back on it, it does have A24 stamped all over it. But yeah, I'm going to let you get into it. What did you think of Beef?
So I didn't initially clamber at the opportunity to watch Beef because I'm often skeptical of new shows that, immediately trend on social media. They're the top of the Netflix viewing chart. And I think a lot of shows that do this, they kind of strike the match at just the right time and they capture this very specific idea that the audience gravitates towards for a brief period, and then a month later nobody remembers the show. It kind of like strikes while the iron's hot and then it sort of fades from the collective consciousness very, very rapidly. And because like the show's narrative or themes, they don't have much in the way of like dramatic longevity, a la, Squid Game. What more is there really to say about that show once you've kind of gotten to the end of it? And I don't think that will be the case with Beef. I took greater interest after I found out it was produced by A24 and it received a lot of critical acclaim. And it has Steven Yeun in it, it has Ali Wong in it, who are two actors, particularly Steven Yeun, who I'm tremendous fans of. And I was kind of intrigued by the premise. It centers around two Asian American individuals, Danny and Amy. Amy is sort of a high society sort of entrepreneur who's in the midst of brokering a very large business deal that could net her a lot of money. And Danny's kind of down on his luck. His parents have had to go back to Korea due to a sort of crime issue that happened inadvertently with their motel business. And he's kind of sort of got this very sort of ragtag construction business that he's trying to sort of build and grow. And they're sort of at two different ends of the social strata, but they're both experiencing a lot of extraneous stress in their life that sort of got this, and a lot of pent up frustration and stuff and unresolved anger. And they by chance find themselves accosting each other in a very aggressive and unexpectedly destructive road rage incident at the very start of the first episode. It happens within the first 6 minutes. And it's kind of this thrill and sort of jolt of adrenaline, this sort of pent-up anger that sort of spills out into this moment of, vehicular aggression. And whilst it is sort of, they're cursing at each other, it does weirdly rejuvenate them and sort of give them something to sort of focus their energy in on. So it's sort of, it starts up this very sort of toxic but also kind of propulsively thrilling turn of events, and the way in which that relationship sort of develops and the various things that happen and sort of the chain reaction of events is really compelling to watch. And overall I thoroughly enjoyed Beef. I think it's really well done. There's a great combination of some really interesting themes that feel like they're striking while the iron is hot on the conversation of mental health, and a subversive plot that consistently delivers like really daring and gripping surprises. I can't remember the last time I was actually this consistently shocked by where a show went narratively. It's got a very sardonic sense of humour, and the two central performances are really excellent. I think the thing I like most about it is how layered it is from a screenplay perspective. The road rage incident that acts as the inciting incident for all the action that comprises the rest of the season, it happens, like I said, very, very early on in the first episode. And that's really just a jumping off point, rather than, the big plot point you'd think it is when you kind of read the log lines for the series. You'd think it would take up a lot more screen time, but it actually doesn't. It's really just a catalyst for a much more complex story that follows. And narratively, it really dexterously moves between being these really like hilariously chaotic battles of wits between the pair and their schemes against each other, and these subplots and chaotic battles of wit that as they try to one up each other. These subplots and side characters that weave very nicely into the overall thematic tapestry, and sequences that like extend the emotional reach of the drama and cut deeply to the empathetic heart of these initially quite unlikable characters. Although it's important to say that is kind of by design. We don't. They're kind of compelling in how rancid they are to begin with, but actually you find that they've got a lot of emotional damage and friction underneath their sort of very hostile exteriors, that allows us to find a way into them emotionally and find them very compelling and not sort of be immediately repulsed and repelled by them. Like the best films and TV series, it's about many different things and is very robust in even-handed with its plot and character development. Motivating factors in like a seemingly rash action. You go, well, why the hell did they do that? But actually, when you trace back what's happened in the person's life, that action then totally makes sense, even if it doesn't obviously make it right. There's the destructive nature of unaddressed anger. There's sort of a class disparity, class warfare thing going on. A lot of really powerful and interesting themes on how mental illness and negative emotions don't discriminate based on economic background. The importance of seeking positive outlets for rage, depression, anxiety, and how aversion to therapy or seeking help for personal issues will fester and cause wider reaching pain. Also some kind of interesting things about how sometimes things that people say that seem helpful, they do kind of involve an element of projection and sort of kind of unintentionally discounting or minimizing the other person's feelings, which I find really interesting, considering my own personal links with people I know in the profession of counselling, with my mother being a counsellor, and just that idea of you have to be really careful what you say, because it can be, it might not have the intended effect that you wanted it to. So there was a couple of really smart placements of dialogue that sort of clued you into that idea. There's a particularly impactful sequence involving Stephen Yeun experiencing kind of floods of emotional catharsis while attending a church and like singing in a choir, and it's a real acting and directing high point for the series, and kind of it just sort of distills the narrative idea really perfectly into that singular sequence. It really just kind of sums up what the show's about really beautifully. It's very well plotted as well. There's various sort of character revelations and reveals that intersect very cleanly and satisfyingly, but they don't do so in a way that feels too perfectly coincidental. The causal chain between the various plot points and the character decisions is really solid and logical. There's very little in the way of, oh, that wouldn't make sense, that character wouldn't do that. The way certain actions have knock-on effects makes a lot of sense. There's a trip to Las Vegas in the 4th episode that doesn't smack of a hollow like runtime extension, but whereas it actually very smartly facilitates several events that bring characters to realizations about actions that others have committed, which then of course leads on to other things. So it's like, oh wow, this is, because it takes place at a convention at a hotel, it's like, oh, getting these guys in this, removing them from their usual surroundings has like an interesting emotional mental health therapy angle to the story, but also it's creating this sort of character melting pot, and characters seeing each other and realizing what each other have done to get here. It sort of sets up other points to come in the narrative. It's consistently shocking and unpredictable throughout the entirety of its 10-episode runtime, which is no mean feat. It's difficult to maintain suspense over the course of a 10-episode series, although the episodes aren't particularly long at 35 minutes, but I was constantly on the edge of my seat. To be able to stay action-packed without doing a disservice to the depth of the character examination as well should be applauded. That balance is like additionally reflected in the tone and the score as well. The show in general has that air of humanistic poetry that an A24 project is able to conjure so well, but it also has a simmering tension to it, that won't come as a surprise, considering the fury and the rage sort of subject matter focus of the show. But the simmering tension, it's less reminiscent. No, it's reminiscent of a less like throbbing and more gradually escalating approach to like the Safdie brother approach to tension. You know, it's not quite as full throttle as Uncut Gems. It has that same kind of feeling of anxiety, but it's not as in your face. It's a lot more kind of gradually sort of building and sort of revealing itself and, you know, reaching a boiling point throughout the course of the series. The soundtrack has these like aggressive, punked out and thick bass lines that contrast really nicely with these like eerily melancholic pianos that kind of remind me of that Celeste song Strange, but in the best way. It's kind of they punctuate their specific tones and emotional feelings in those moments really, really well. If I have some minor gripes, there's a slight turn into surrealism in the 8th episode, which I didn't think entirely worked and gelled with the series as a whole, but I did understand the messaging it was trying to convey, and it's pretty brief. It doesn't take up a lot of that episode's runtime, so the tonal disruption is fairly minimal. I also think that trimming the fat screenplay-wise with one or two of the smaller plot points could have saved 1 or 2 points where the series felt, you know, a tad narratively saturated. But as I was saying to you earlier before we started recording, the ending is so perfect and so wonderfully without any dialogue and a perfect music choice, just really fantastically sums up and sort of ties the bow on what the series sort of thesis is, without, you know, tying up sort of the chaos and sort of progression of the character stories too neatly either. And it really just made the entire show better, and it just put a massive smile on my face when the sort of the needle drop on the song happened and the cut to the credits happened. I was like, that is just touch of class there by the writers directors. It's terrific. I would give this an A-, and I would recommend that, you know, despite the kind of the zeitgeisty Netflix hype, I would say definitely check this out. It's not just a short-lived trend. It's a really great series.
Wait to get into it and finish it and tell you what I think of it. But not today, because today we have to go to our next review, and that is A Good Person, which is the Florence Pugh Morgan Freeman film. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
I've seen pictures for this on the tube, but I've seen nothing else. It's just one of those films that I'm like, it feels like it's been coming for a really long time, but I hadn't seen like when it was going to be released.
I'd heard barely anything until I saw a recent review. I think it was on Hot Ones with Florence Pugh, who's always such a joy to watch be interviewed, and she was kind of speaking about it because you know, the writer-director Zach Braff, you know, she was in a previous relationship with him, so she has kind of that connection. Them working together again is kind of interesting. You know, Morgan Freeman isn't working as frequently as he once was, so it's kind of cool to see him back on screen. And, you know, a lot of people kind of have, there's a sort of a cult following around Zach Braff's previous film as a writer-director, you know, Garden State. So it's kind of interesting to see, you know, him coming back onto the fold with a quite weighty drama, simultaneous cinematic theatrical release alongside premiering on Sky Cinema. I watched it on Sky. I don't think it played for very long around us, so I think a lot of people will find this on Sky Cinema. And it centers around a woman named Alison whose life falls apart when she is involved in a fatal car accident that happens as a result of her looking at her phone for too long, and it results in her soon-to-be sister-in-law and another member of the family being killed. And that causes, she survives but develops an addiction to prescription painkillers, and her sort of engagement with her fiance falls apart. But she, in the midst of, you know, her, you know, crippling addiction and guilt, she finds and sort of rekindles a connection with the guy who was to be her father-in-law, and also her ex-fiance, and looks to potentially like rebuild that connection and hopefully like kick her addiction and try to get back on track with regards to, you know, her life and her healing process. I think to start with the good, the performance is very solid. It's nice to see after, you know, having, you know, history of recently been in very sort of mediocre action vehicles, that Morgan Freeman is doing solid dramatic work again. And I think it just shows how sort of complex and empathetic he can be in the right dramatic role. It's a real pleasure to see him on screen again. And I think this is really great casting with Florence Pugh. I mean, she, in sort of the moments prior to her life falling apart, she has that sort of very warm and inviting, friendly, sort of sprightly energy to her. But she also is able to do that sort of dour, caustic thing really well, and it's very good from a performance perspective in terms of gelling with the screenplay, because it means that we can see the sort of the toxicity that her addiction has forced her into and is sort of pulling out of her, and how sort of poisonous and destructive she can be to the people around her. But we don't lose sight always of the good person, the titular good person who's sort of underneath that rougher exterior. Unfortunately, I think the drama kind of falls down for a couple of reasons. In that, I think the main reason is that it falls victim to a lot of very obvious plot contrivances that, whilst aren't as cliche, cringe-inducing, or eye-rolling as some other dramas I have seen in this vein over the years, they're not particularly inventive, and the plot isn't thematically very deep. I mean, the title implies, and some of the plot details imply, this examination of whether a person can be good despite having done some really awful things and having made some really terrible mistakes. But the film doesn't really dive all that deeply with it. I appreciate maybe the intent to not sort of speechify on those thematic points, but I think the film goes too far in the other direction and doesn't really unpack them to a satisfying degree. And considering the film sort of tries to upend a really sort of pristine sort of upper middle class existence at the start of the film, all this really sort of tying together of a lot of different character stories and very sort of all too convenient and melodramatic contrivances and sort of dramatic explosions later on, it kind of ends up seeming, as perfect and as, false as that sort of lifestyle it initially intends to sort of subvert. And I think particularly there was one scene towards the back end where I'm just like, oh, we've been sort of coasting on a level of kind of average, sort of tepid, not particularly insightful character drama up until that point. And then we just dove straight into really, deep and heightened melodrama, and it rang really sour, and I was kind of disappointed by that. And considering the caliber of the actors we have on screen, and some of the direction's nice as well, with some of the fisheye lenses and the rough handheld camera work, where when she's having a depressive episode, or sort of a drug fueled euphoria, or the problems of withdrawal. Considering those points, it's a shame then that the drama itself is so uninspired. Even if you can tell the film tonally has its heart really in the right place. So it's not awful, but I do think it falls quite significantly short of being the powerful, inspirational and very affecting drama I think it could have been. Although it's not terrible, I think the performances save it from being really going to really delving into some like kind of lower quality stuff, but it doesn't really rise above mediocrity for me. I think I would give this a C+.
Just seeing Morgan Freeman working again though. Like he's not been in anything for ages.
Yeah, that's good. That was heartening, and to see him in solid form as well. And he's not just being super dour either. He is sort of, there are moments where sort of his age and sort of the character's attitudes, due to the disparity in age between him and his granddaughter, kind of make for some sort of funny, humorous moments. And there were some lines that did kind of make me smirk with regards to Morgan Freeman's character, which was the intention of those scenes, and that was nice. So if nothing else, to see Florence Pugh delivering another really terrific performance, there's certainly things to like here.
To our next review, our next film is called Blue Lights. Once again, no, nothing. I'm in the dark. Yeah. I need the light. The light, the blue. I need the blue light. Shine a blue light on blue lights for me, please.
I'll bluely enlighten you as to what this one is. This was a in another feature of his sterling recommendations, Patrick, our good friend, recommended this to me. It's a BBC iPlayer mini series, 6-part crime drama focused on the various different exploits of police officers looking to sort of get out of their probationary sort of training period and, start, being involved in, proper work in and around the city of Belfast, frontline response police officers who are still, in a naive kind of rookie stage of sort of experiencing the unique pressures and dangers of the job. And whilst I wouldn't go as far to say I dislike them, I do have a history of becoming somewhat disenchanted with the BBC's regular output in the field of crime dramas, aside from obviously the brilliantly compelling Line of Duty, which I don't know a single person who doesn't love that show, me included. And whilst none are at all like outright bad, I generally find them to bleed together in kind of how uniformly regimented they are in their very kind of stoic visual style and filmmaking conventions. I also see them as being kind of narratively prosaic. They kind of lack the poetry and spark of some more emotive or socially insightful American crime dramas like The Wire or We Own This City or The Sopranos or shows like that, or the atmosphere of some more Scandinavian Nordic noir crime shows like The Bridge, The Killing, Borgens, shows like that. But what I liked about Blue Lights is that the general narrative idea that forms the basis for the series is kind of refreshing from that general mold that I've grown disinterested in. It has that flavour of kind of underestimated danger and sudden spikes in tension that arise as a result of these probationary police officers being thrown in at the deep end of combating local criminal enterprises. In that sense, it kind of positively reminded me of a less Hollywoodized and slightly more British social realist sort of gritty take on the atmosphere of Training Day, the Ethan Hawke and Denzel Washington police thriller. And the soft grit and sort of crackle of the celluloid cinematography, it's very quite obviously shot on film, and the lightly handheld touch of the camera work, it helps to bring out much more of this grit. I do think that due to the remaining sort of pervading sheen and robustness of that typical aesthetic, BBC approach, the direction can only push this grit so far. And had the directorial and tonal approach had been able to dive like kind of fully into the gutter of this scenario and the crime that's going on, I think Blue Lights could have been even more impactful than it was. But in its state, I do think it has a shade more, conviction and grit than your average BBC drama does. I think that the varying kind of almost episodic plot strands of the different recruits and the obstacles they face in order to pass their probation and what they bring to the force, it provides a kind of a welcome and interesting structural shake-up to that usual UK police procedural plot formula as well. There's a woman whose past experience as a social worker. It kind of helps her empathetically work with traumatized witnesses. There is an officer who is targeted by a known syndicate, which kind of endangers her personal life and family, kind of like a witness protection almost kind of scenario. And kind of it was kind of interesting to see the personal effects outside of the police force and the impact it has on her life and the people around her. An officer who's kind of struggling to meet the required proficiency in marksmanship in terms of accuracy when firing guns. An officer whose privileged background kind of allows her to fast track through training, kind of leaving her ill prepared and resistant to like the physical dangers in the field. She kind of like tries to duck out of that wherever she can, sort of cut corners and do some slightly dubious police duties in order to like avoid actual sort of getting her hands dirty in the conflict. So those plot lines are really interesting and refreshing from the typical mold. I do kind of wish the writers had either been more even-handed with their focus on the various officers, or they picked others to focus on more. In the form we get the show in, the less interesting of those officers get more of the screen time. The overarching conflict and investigation within the local crime syndicate it also just seems somewhat cobbled together and murky. It's not very fleshed out in terms of the investigative details or the details of the actual sort of criminal operations that are going on. and it does leave the series somewhat lacking in terms of a decisive narrative drive or arc. I think it would have been more effective if the script had either fully committed to the episodic set pieces involving the officers while running their training progression alongside it, or they'd, made it the normal kind of full investigative procedure with the rookie officer element worked in. That being said, though, I did really enjoy this, and perhaps maybe at 6-hour-long episodes it could be an episode shorter. But I think with the differing characters and the way they all kind of, the friction that's caused between the various police officers and their differing approaches to the job, it was a welcome kind of shake up to the formula that I'm used to, and it piqued my interest more than the typical BBC crime drama that I've sort of what I've come to expect from that style and that genre. And I did enjoy it the time it was on, and the Irish setting does also provide a unique spin too. I give this a B. I think it's solid. If you're into this sort of thing, I would check this out. I had a good time with this.
Patrick, back with the good recommendations. I think we should just have a regular segment, just what Patrick recommended this week.
Patrick's Rex.
Patrick's Rex. So moving on from a BBC series, I've been so excited for this film. This is Polite Society, and I'm buzzed. I really want to know what your thoughts were on this.
Yeah, so I mean, when I first saw the trailer for this, it was kind of like it was giving me massive Bend It Like Beckham vibes. That was kind of that same sort of sprightly, culturally inflected, sort of very sort of representation heavy, proudly British comedy drama that was so enjoyable when we got that first feature, and has played well in other forms and other films since. So it focuses on a British Pakistani family, specifically the teenage daughter Ria, in London. She aspires to be sort of a very proficient movie stunt woman. Her idol's kind of Eunice Huthart, who was a very sort of popular on the Gladiator sort of obstacle course show, and then became like a stunt double for Angelina Jolie and Mila Jovovich and Uma Thurman sort of later in her career. So that's kind of like a funny little wink to anybody who knows, sort of is familiar with the industry as well. She creates these sort of films like martial art training videos of under an alter ego called the Fury, and sort of does these very mad sort of routines of sort of quite hefty martial arts moves that sort of call back to like sort of wuxia sort of martial arts movies, like kind of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon kind of stuff. And her parents are very kind of loving and traditional, Fatima and Rafe. They are sort of discouraging of her dreams, though. Her sister Lena, was a art school student, but left because, there were career prospects, and she was discouraged to do so because of the sort of Pakistani cultural values and the influence sort of surrounding families. And that Ria and Lena are sort of rebels. They sort of rebel against the sort of social norm and the preconceived notion that they must get a certain job and what is expected of them as young Pakistani women. And Lena is sort of caught up in the allure of this sort of very seemingly very good-hearted and congenial sort of guy called Salim, and then the prospect of a arranged marriage rears its head, and Ria is completely adverse to this and wants to save her sister. And sort of chaos and hijinks ensue as she sort of enlists her friends, sort of try and sort of put a stop to the wedding, and also sort of dig up some dirt on this guy in the interest of saving her sister from the patriarchy. It's very kind of amusing and winking. So I was intrigued to see how well Polite Society would work overall, due to like the seemingly quite chaotic genre collision that the trailer kind of clues you in for, and that and the men are trash kind of messaging from the girls that came across in the promotional material. It seemed kind of simplistic in terms of social commentary and not very like kind of forward thinking. It seemed kind of very one-sided, so I was like, I'm not sure how that's going to play. And also this again, the Bend It Like Beckham vibes, the the heist element nature of the film and sort of the martial arts inflected action. It just seemed like a really wild ride now, and I was really intrigued to see if it was all going to gel well together on screen. And I have to say that I think for the most part, the genre hopping does work quite well. The director's like love of westerns, wuxia martial arts films, Bollywood, Jordan Peele-esque social horror. It all flows forth really energetically and colourfully through the visual style and very sort of visual nods and references to these genres that are clearly providing a very big influence on the director's approach with Polite Society. You get these kind of very squashed widescreen letterbox aspect ratios. The kind of the screen kind of gets progressively squashed. You see the aspect ratio kind of thinning, and there's really intense crash zooms in on the eyes that in the style of a spaghetti western. These balletic and floaty, but also quite crunchy and bombastic martial arts fight sequences that almost seem to be like a send up of that style of choreography when people are quite obviously on wires and flying through the air. I don't think every flash of like exaggerated reality entirely works. There's a destructive kind of martial arts fight scene between the two sisters that feels a little too outlandish considering the context of the location within which it takes place and the context of their argument, which spurs on the physical altercation. But I think most of these stylistic touches go over well and are very entertaining and in how kind of irreverent and winking they are and satirical they are to the audience, especially someone like me who kind of knows all these stylistic and genre markers. The film is very heavy on the genre pastiche, which I think could have been aggravating and egregious if the filmmaking did go like completely full throttle and kinetic with it. But thankfully, the director shows good judgment in how exuding a degree of restraint in this regard means that it makes the film kind of narratively work in terms of the interplay between the characters, but it also just means it makes it slightly more palatable and like it isn't completely you're not being shaken by the lapels by the film. You're given some breathing room and you're not just being indulgently beaten over the head. The colors aren't super saturated. The pace of the edit is measured in the right moments to give space and relaxation and moments of levity with the drama, but it doesn't go completely like hell-bent for leather in the quicker montages, which is nice. You don't get any like kind of incoherent spicy quick cutting. It's all sort of judged quite well in sort of the wide angles and the punchier pace, but not too exhausting cutting of the montages. It does revel the film, and it does revel in that pulpy and self-reflexive brand of action comedy and entertainment and that infectious energy, which is great to see. But it's subdued enough that it doesn't become obnoxious, which is really good to see, as I felt like that could have been a danger having seen the trailer. It's also fab to see such inclusive casting and a proudly British and vibrant film with a Pakistani family at its centre. We should absolutely be getting more of those sort of cultural focuses in British cinema and cinema as a whole. Some of the criticism and lampooning of predatory men, arranged marriages, and the class division in that culture, as kind of implied by the trailer, they do feel somewhat juvenile and crude in execution to me when I'd seen them on screen, and a little bit rudimentary. It's not trying to shoot for anything super deep or anything, and sometimes the performances can be a little strained, which doesn't help some of the expression of some of those themes. But I do think Polite Society, for the most part, gets away with it due to the fact that the film is so tonally clearly steeped in parody, and with parody and satire and spoof, heightening conventional plot elements, messaging, and stylistic markers from previous, genre films is kind of the name of the game there. So it doesn't seem entirely out of place, even though I don't, the datedness and the rudimentariness of some of those, the expression of those thematic ideas, it doesn't, I'd say about 80 to 90% it gets away with it due to the tone it's clearly striving for. And also when the screenplay brings in elements, that are reminiscent of some plot details from like the reveals in Get Out, for example. I was surprised how much actually I would be very surprised if Get Out wasn't a touchstone for certain plot points. When those story points are introduced, it really helps tie together that broadly satirical feel that the story is going for. And, sometimes it is just really fun to see a really, massively vibrant and glitzy Pakistani wedding just get shot up and kicking, flying kung fu moves and just gunfights and action just all kicking off. There's parts of it that clearly aren't supposed to be reflective of reality in a kind of bombastic and over the top, but the film kind of knows it is and is striving for that very kind of entertaining and wry, but also, with some satirical points underneath. And I had a really good time with this. It wasn't exactly a thinker, but and maybe the way it wanted to be, but I'm not sure that was necessarily what it was going for. And I found a lot of entertainment with it. It was and I hope the director goes even further with and refines their style even more for future works, because this was very entertaining. I would give this a B. I enjoyed this very much.
It's definitely something to look to try and catch up on. I would say that when I watched the trailer, I didn't see the same kind of Bend It Like Beckham similarities I think I did, mainly because I'm really not a fan of Bend It Like Beckham. I the film was forced on me at school, and it's so awkward. It's not my favorite. I like director, I think Jinder Kachar. We just check that I got that right.
I think so. Didn't she do Blinded by the Light?
Director Gurinder Chadha. She's done quite a few films. I actually like a lot of the things that she's made. I didn't realise that she was the writer, director, and producer of Angus Thong's Perfect Snogging, which is just...
Was she? I have no idea about that. That's wild.
It is fantastic coming of age film, but I think Bend It Like Beckham is just a sore spot for me. Some of the dialogue in that is so awkward, and when I saw the trailer for this, I just thought it seemed... first of all, it's a different culture. It's Bend It Like Beckham isn't Pakistani.
No, it's Indian, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the family's Punjabi, apparently. So I think there is like a cultural difference in the film and in the humour and in the way that it's written. And this also seemed to take a lot more cinema references. Like Bend It Like Beckham is very much like a coming of age drama and doesn't go into surrealist at all, whereas this seemed to go a bit nuts, which I'm always here for. I actually thought that from the trailer, some of the fight scenes reminded me more of Kingsman than they reminded me of anything else. Just some of the quick cutting, the bizarre, over the top nature of it, that kind of gave me that title. I'm really excited to see this. I think it sounds like a real love letter to action cinema, coming from a different perspective, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it evokes that style in a very smile-inducing and entertaining way. I think you'll have a good time with this.
Okay, and that is all of our reviews this week. So, Billy, give us the rundown.
So, next week we have the long-awaited Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which I know you've already seen, but I will be seeing in the next couple of days, and to see how they tie up the remainder of that trilogy. We have a Korean drama called Return to Seoul, which has a very kind of interesting background in terms of the writer, director, and star sort of collaboration and the exploration of identity in that film. We have an Italian drama called The Eight Mountains, which played very well at the 2022 Cannes Film Festival and tied with the jury prize at the festival with EO, which we've previously reviewed here as well. So I'm interested to see that. And also a 30th anniversary reissue of the Martin Scorsese period drama, The Age of Innocence.
So thank you everyone for listening. If you are listening on Apple or on Amazon Music or Audible, please do give us please leave a review and share with your friends. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And yeah, I look forward to being back next week and hearing what fab believes. Bye.
Bye.